If someone had told me a year ago that my life's great turning point would happen in a dusty, pine-scented cabin miles from anywhere, trapped by a freak autumn blizzard, I would have laughed. I didn't do turning points. I did carefully planned itineraries. I did solitude. My life was a meticulously curated collection of quiet rooms, stacked books, and the silent, predictable company of plants. I had come to the mountains of the high country not for an adventure, but for an escape into a deeper, more profound quiet. I came to study the resilience of Arctic lupin, not the unsettling landscape of my own heart. My world was small by design. It was a terrarium I had built for myself, sealed against the unpredictable weather of human connection. Inside, everything was controlled, cataloged, understood. Outside was chaos. Outside was Cole. I first saw him the day I arrived at the Black Bear Ridge Lodge, which was less a lodge and more a collection of rustic cabins huddled together against the vast, indifferent wilderness. He was wrestling a massive cord of firewood off the back of a flatbed truck, muscles in his back and arms cording under a faded flannel shirt. He moved with an economy of motion that was both brutally efficient and strangely graceful. He was a part of the landscape, elemental and solid, like the granite cliffs that loomed over the valley. He was the caretaker, the everything man, the one who fixed the leaky faucet in my cabin, who delivered firewood, who drove the ancient supply truck up the winding mountain pass. He was a constant, peripheral presence in my first few weeks. A flash of plaid flannel through the trees. The distant, rhythmic thud of an axe splitting wood. The low rumble of his truck engine fading down the dirt road. From the safe distance of my cabin porch, I watched him. It became a part of my routine, as ingrained as brewing my morning coffee or cleaning the lenses of my field microscope. I observed him the way I observed the flora of the region, with a detached, scientific curiosity that was a complete and utter lie. There was nothing detached about the way my stomach tightened when he'd look up from his work and his gaze would happen to sweep past my cabin. My heart would become a frantic moth beating against the glass walls of my chest. He was, I decided, arrogant, confident to the point of dismissal. His greetings were clipped, a sharp nod or a terse. Morning he never smiled. His eyes, the color of a stormy sky, seemed to look right through me, assessing me as just another temporary problem, another tourist who didn't know the difference between a fir and a spruce. The distance between us was a chasm, dug by his silence and my fear. A professional hierarchy, the city academic and the mountain man, and a personal one, the observer and the observed. I felt fragile and out of place under his gaze, a hothouse plant exposed to the alpine frost. I told myself my fascination was purely aesthetic. He was a compelling physical specimen, a study in rugged self-sufficiency. I cataloged the details, the way a web of fine lines crinkled at the corners of his eyes when he squinted at the sun, the dark stubble that always shadowed his jaw, the thick, callous strength of his hands. It was research, I insisted, just another form of observation in a long and lonely career of it. The lie was comfortable for a time. It allowed me to exist in my carefully constructed world while still stealing glances at the one outside. I was safe. He was distant. The chasm was wide and deep, and I had no intention of ever trying to cross it. My routine was my armor. Wake, coffee, hike, collect specimens, document, eat, sleep. A loop of quiet purpose that kept the longing at bay. A longing I refused to name. Then the weather turned. It came without warning, a malevolent shift in the wind. The sky, a brilliant, cloudless blue that morning, turned a bruised purple-gray in the space of an hour. The temperature plummeted. I was miles from a lodge, high up on a ridge, documenting a rare species of saxifrage growing in a rock crevice. The first snowflakes were a novelty, fat and wet and beautiful. Then they became a swarm, a blinding white curtain that erased the world. The wind howled, a living thing with teeth and claws. My carefully planned itinerary dissolved into a single, panicked imperative: get back. I stumbled down the trail, visibility reduced to a few feet, the path I knew so well now, a treacherous, alien landscape. By the time I saw the faint, welcoming yellow light of the main lodge. I was soaked through, shivering uncontrollably, my fingers stiff and useless. Cole was there, of course. He wrenched the door open against the wind as I staggered onto the porch. For a moment, he just looked at me, his face grim, those stormy eyes taking in my pathetic state. There was no "I told you so," no lecture about the foolishness of city folk, just a quiet intensity. "Get inside," he commanded, his voice a low rumble that cut through the shriek of the wind. He steered me toward the massive stone fireplace that dominated the common room. His hand on my back was a shock, a sudden, searing point of heat that burned through the layers of my wet jacket. It wasn't gentle. It was firm, proprietary, as if he were herding a stray animal to shelter. "The generator's running, but the pass is already closed," he said, his back to me as he stoked the fire, sending a shower of orange sparks up the chimney. "No one's getting in or out for a while. You're stuck." And just like that, the walls of my terrarium shattered. My routine was obliterated. My solitude was invaded. I was trapped in this cabin, in this storm, with the one person who made the quiet, predictable rhythm of my heart pound like a drum. The chasm between us had vanished, filled in by a sudden, suffocating proximity. We were sharing the same small pocket of air, the same flickering firelight. I spent the first day huddled in a worn armchair, pretending to read a book I couldn't focus on. Cole was a constant, restless motion. He checked windows, secured shutters, hauled in more firewood, his presence filling the lodge until it felt like there was no room left for me to breathe. The silence between us wasn't peaceful. It was a dense, charged thing, thick with everything unsaid. I watched him. I couldn't help it. My eyes were drawn to him, to the fluid power in his movements, the focused set of his jaw. I was no longer observing from a safe distance. This was close. Too close. I could smell the faint, clean scent of sawdust and cold air that clung to him. I could see the tiny, faded scar that bisected his left eyebrow, a detail I'd never noticed from my porch. I saw the weariness in his shoulders that he couldn't quite hide, the deep-set exhaustion of a man who carried the weight of this entire place on his own. He wasn't just an archetype anymore. He was a person, tired and tense, and that was infinitely more dangerous. Late that night, the generator sputtered and died. The lights flickered once, twice, and then plunged us into a profound darkness, broken only by the frantic, dancing light of the fire. The roar of the storm outside seemed to intensify, as if to mock our sudden vulnerability. "Damn it," Cole muttered from across the room. A curse, but it was quiet, edged with a frustration that felt achingly human. I heard him moving in the dark, the scrape of a chair, the soft thud of his boots on the wooden floor. He was looking for a lantern, I assumed. I sat perfectly still, my own uselessness a heavy cloak. I, the man of books and theories, was completely inept in this world of practical realities. I didn't know how to fix a generator or prepare for a blizzard. I only knew how to watch. He fumbled on the mantelpiece, his hand knocking something over with a clatter. A candlestick, maybe. I flinched at the sound. "Julian," he said. His voice in the dark was different. Stripped of its usual brusqueness, it was just a sound, a vibration in the air between us. The first time he'd used my name, it landed on me like a physical weight. Yes. My own voice was a pathetic squeak. "Matches. On the table next to you." My hands trembled as I fell for the small box. My fingers brushed against it, and I fumbled, sending it skittering across the tabletop. I crawled on the floor, my hands sweeping through the darkness, my face hot with shame. Finally, my fingers closed around the small, rough box. As I stood up, he was suddenly there, a looming shadow in the firelight. We had both moved toward the center of the room. He reached for the matches at the same instant I lifted them. Our hands collided in the dark. It was nothing, an accident, a clumsy, incidental touch, but it felt like a brand. His fingers were rough, calloused, yet the skin was shockingly warm. A current, sharp and electric, shot up my arm, straight to my chest, where my heart seized and then began to hammer against my ribs. I snatched my hand back as if I'd been burned. "Sorry," I whispered, the word lost in the roar of the wind. He didn't say anything. He just took the matchbox from where I dropped it on the floor. I watched his silhouette as he struck a match. The small flame flared to life, illuminating his face in a warm, golden glow. The planes of his cheeks, the stern line of his mouth, the deep-set concentration in his eyes. In that flickering, momentary light, the arrogance I had projected onto him was gone. In its place was something quieter, something more vulnerable, something that looked a lot like loneliness. The storm raged for 2 more days. We fell into a strange, silent domesticity. He handled the practicalities, the fire, melting snow, for water, checking the integrity of the roof. I took over the small kitchen, preparing meals from the canned goods in the pantry. It was a task I could manage, a small corner of competence in a situation where I felt utterly adrift. This shift, this small reversal of roles, changed the air between us. I was no longer just the helpless academic. I was providing something, a small measure of comfort and sustenance. He would come in from the cold, stamping snow from his boots, his face raw from the wind, and I would hand him a steaming mug of coffee or a bowl of soup. He would take it with a quiet, "Thanks," his eyes meeting mine for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. The power dynamic was leveling. He needed the warmth I provided as much as I needed the shelter he maintained. We were 2 people in a box, keeping each other alive. One afternoon, he came inside with a deep gash on his forearm. He'd been trying to clear a fallen branch from one of the cabin roofs and had slipped on the ice. Blood was welling, dark and sluggish against the pale skin of his arm. He stood in the middle of the room, looking at it with a sort of detached annoyance, as if it were a mechanical failure rather than a part of his own body. "Let me see," I said, my voice surprising me with its steadiness. He looked at me, a flicker of something, surprise, skepticism, in his eyes, but he didn't protest. He sat heavily in a chair by the fire and held out his arm. My hands, usually reserved for the delicate work of pressing flowers or adjusting microscope lenses, were suddenly tasked with something raw and real. I fetched the first aid kit. My fingers were clumsy at first as I cleaned the wound, but then a strange calm settled over me. This was just another system, a body that needed mending. I could do this. His skin was warm under my touch. I was acutely aware of the rough texture of his arm hair, the solid muscle beneath the skin, the steady, rhythmic pulse I could feel at his wrist. He was so incredibly alive. I focused on the task, on the technical precision of applying antiseptic and wrapping the bandage. I didn't dare look at his face. I could feel his gaze on me, heavy and unreadable. "You've done this before," he said, his voice quiet. It wasn't a question. "My father was a doctor," I replied, my voice tight. I learned a few things snipping the end of the bandage. I taped it down, my movements overly precise. My work was done, but I didn't pull away. My hand lingered on his arm for a heartbeat too long. When I finally looked up, his face was only inches from mine. The firelight carved shadows and highlights across his features, making him look both older and younger at the same time. The storm in his eyes was quiet for once, replaced by a deep, searching stillness. My breath caught in my throat. The entire world seemed to shrink to the space between us, the air thick and humming with a silent, deafening tension. I could feel the heat radiating from him, could see the slight parting of his lips. This was it, the precipice, the moment where observation had to become action or retreat forever. My fear was a cold, hard knot in my stomach, but beneath it, something else was stirring. A reckless, desperate hope. The third night was the quietest. The wind had finally exhausted itself, and a heavy, sound-dampening blanket of snow had fallen over the world. The silence was absolute, a physical presence that pressed in on the small cabin. We sat on opposite sides of the fire, the space between us charged with the memory of my hand on his arm. I couldn't stand it anymore. The not knowing, the silent, screaming tension. I had to break it, or it would break me. "Why do you stay here?" I asked, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the stillness. Cole looked up from the flames he'd been staring into. His expression was guarded. "It's my job, no," I said, shaking my head. I was tired of the easy answers of the distance. "Not just the job. Why here? This isolation. This emptiness. He was silent for a long time, his gaze lost in the fire. I thought he wasn't going to answer. I thought I had pushed too far, crossed a line I hadn't seen. I had retreated back into my shell, bracing for a dismissive grunt, a change of subject. "It's not empty," he said finally, his voice low and rough. "It's quiet. There's a difference." He shifted, turning to look at me properly. The firelight caught in his eyes. "You come up here for the quiet too, don't you? To get away from all the noise." It was an accusation and an admission all at once. He saw me. He saw past the fussy academic, the city mouse. He saw the same core of loneliness, the same need for stillness that drove him. He was holding up a mirror, and I wasn't sure I liked what I saw. "The noise is people," I admitted, the confession feeling like a betrayal of my own carefully constructed identity. "I'm not good with people." A shadow of a smile, the first I had ever seen, touched his lips. It was a sad, wry thing. "Me neither." And there it was. The crack in the granite facade. The admission of a shared wound. The silence that fell between us now was different. It wasn't empty. It was filled with a fragile, burgeoning understanding. "I've seen you watching me," he said, his voice even lower now, almost a murmur. "Since you got here. From your porch, the heat that flooded my face was agonizing. I was exposed, my secret observations laid bare. I couldn't form a reply. I just stared at him, my heart pounding a frantic, panicked rhythm against my ribs. My stomach felt like it was full of startled birds. "I thought you were judging me," he continued, his eyes never leaving mine. "Figuring me for some kind of uneducated hick. Another specimen to study." "No." I breathed, the word torn from me. "Never. It wasn't like that." "What was it like then, Julian?" He leaned forward slightly, closing the distance between us. The air grew thin. I couldn't lie. Not now. Not when he was looking at me with such raw, unnerving honesty. The truth was the most terrifying thing I could offer, but it was all I had left. "I thought you were beautiful," I whispered. "Like the mountains. Overwhelming. And completely out of reach." The admission hung in the air between us, shimmering and dangerous. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes softened, the storm receding to reveal a calm, deep sea. He stood up, and for a terrifying second, I thought he was going to walk away, to leave me with my foolish, naked confession. Instead, he crossed the small space between us in 2 strides. He stopped in front of my chair, looking down at me. He was a mountain, and I was in his shadow. I had to crane my neck to look up at him. He reached out, not quickly, but with a slow, deliberate motion that gave me 1,000 years to pull away. I didn't. I couldn't. His rough, calloused fingers came to rest against my cheek. His thumb stroked my jawline, a touch so impossibly gentle it made me want to cry. It was a question, an offer. I leaned into his touch, my eyes fluttering shut. My entire body felt like a live wire. This was it, the point of no return. He lowered himself, kneeling in front of my chair, so our faces were level. He smelled of wood smoke and pine and the cold night air. He smelled like everything I had been missing. "You're not out of reach," he murmured, his breath warm against my lips. And then he kissed me. It wasn't a frantic, passionate kiss like the ones in books or movies. It was slow, hesitant. It was a question, filled with all the uncertainty and longing that had simmered between us for weeks. His lips were chapped and firm against mine. It was a kiss of discovery, a mapping of new territory. I brought my hands up to cup his face, my fingers tangling in the soft hair at the nape of his neck. He made a low sound in his throat, a sound of surrender, and deep in the kiss, his arms sliding around my waist to pull me closer. The world fell away. There was no storm, no cabin, no past, no future. It was only this, the solid warmth of him, the shocking intimacy of his mouth on mine, the quiet, staggering truth of it. I wasn't observing anymore. I was participating. I was feeling, and it was the most terrifying, most wonderful thing I had ever known. I woke to the pale, gray light of dawn filtering through the grimy windows. For a moment, I was disoriented. The room was cold. The fire had died down to a bed of glowing embers. I was lying on the sofa, covered with a thick wool blanket, and I was alone. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the fog of sleep. I sat up, my heart starting its frantic, familiar rhythm of anxiety. The armchair opposite was empty. The cabin was silent. Utterly, terrifyingly silent. He was gone. My mind raced, a frantic spiral of doubt and self-recrimination. It was a mistake, a fluke of isolation and proximity, a moment of weakness for him, a moment of monumental foolishness for me. I had misread everything. The kindness, the confession, the kiss, it was all just a product of the storm, as transient as the snowflakes now melting in the weak morning sun. I got up, my movements stiff and sore. A fresh wave of shame washed over me as I remembered the hours after that first kiss. The tentative, fumbling exploration in the firelight. The way we had ended up on the sofa, not speaking, just holding each other against the immense silence of the snow-covered world until we'd both drifted off to sleep. It had felt so real, so solid. Now, in the harsh light of morning, it felt like a dream I had been stupid enough to believe in. I walked to the window. The world outside was transformed, buried under a pristine, impossibly deep layer of white. The sun was rising, casting a pink and orange glow on the snow, making it glitter like a field of diamonds. It was beautiful, but the beauty felt mocking. A clean slate, a world wiped clean of last night's intimacy. There were footprints in the snow leading away from the lodge. A single set, his. He had left. He had woken up next to me and had walked away. The knot in my stomach tightened until it was a physical pain. This was why I built walls. This was why I preferred the company of plants. They didn't kiss you in the firelight and then disappear in the morning, leaving you alone with the echoing silence and the bitter taste of regret. My old solitude, once a comfort, now felt like a punishment. It was no longer just an absence of people. It was the specific, aching absence of him. I spent the day in a haze of misery, mechanically going through the motions of survival. I rebuilt the fire. I made coffee. I stared out the window. Every creak of the old building made my head snap up, my heart leaping with a stupid, traitorous hope, only to crash back down into the pit of my stomach. The silence was a constant companion, whispering all my deepest fears back to me. You're too much. You're not enough. You're alone because you're meant to be alone. I replayed every moment from the night before, dissecting it, searching for the exact point where I had made my mistake. The confession? Too forward. The kiss? Too eager. Had I said something wrong in the sleepy quiet afterward? I tortured myself with possibilities, my own mind becoming a more effective prison than any blizzard. By late afternoon, I had resigned myself to the new reality. He was gone. When the past was cleared, I would leave. I would go back to my quiet rooms and my stacked books. I would try to forget the rough texture of his hand, the taste of his lips, the brief, shattering illusion that I could be someone who was touched, who was wanted. I would rebuild my terrarium, and this time the glass would be thicker. The sun began to set, painting the snow in shades of violet and deep blue. The cold was seeping back into the cabin, a reflection of the chill in my own chest. I was about to draw the curtains, to block out the beautiful, lonely world when I saw it. A figure, moving slowly, steadily, through the deep snow, coming toward the lodge. My heart stopped. It couldn't be, but it was. It was Cole. He was carrying something, a pack on his back, and what looked like a sack slung over his shoulder. He moved with a weary determination, each step a clear effort in the thigh-deep snow. I stood frozen by the window, my mind a blank slate of shock and disbelief. He hadn't left. He was coming back. I watched him trudge the last few yards, my breath held tight in my chest. He reached the porch, stamping the snow from his boots with a familiar, rhythmic thud. I heard the scrape of the door, and then he was inside, bringing a blast of frigid air with him. He stood just inside the doorway, his shoulders slumped with exhaustion. His face was chapped, raw by the cold, and his clothes were damp. He looked at me, and in his eyes I saw not arrogance or dismissal, but a deep, bone-weary vulnerability. And something else. Regret. The radio, he said, his voice hoarse. He gestured with his head toward the pack on his back. The antenna on the roof was iced over. Had to climb up and clear it. Took all day. He dropped the sack on the floor with a heavy thud. Supplies from emergency cache down the valley. Figured we were running low on coffee. He had gone out into that dangerous, frozen world not to escape me, but to provide for us. To fix things. To get coffee. The sheer, mundane absurdity of it, the profound, practical care in that simple act, broke something open inside me. "I thought you left," I whispered, the words small and fragile in the quiet room. He finally looked me full in the face. The exhaustion in his eyes was mingled with a pained confusion. "Left? Why would I leave? You were gone when I woke up. There were no... You didn't say anything." My voice cracked on the last word. He took a step closer, his expression softening with a dawning understanding. "Julian, I'm not good at this." He gestured vaguely between us, at the air that was still thick with the memory of the night before. Waking up next to someone. I didn't know what to do, what to say, so I did what I always do. I went to work. I found a problem to fix. It was the most honest, most vulnerable thing he could possibly said. He wasn't a man of easy words or grand emotional declarations. He was a man of action, of practicalities. His fear didn't make him cruel. It made him revert to what he knew. Fixing things. Providing. "I'm not good at this either," I admitted, a wetness blurring my vision. My first thought was that I had made a mistake. That I had imagined everything. "You didn't imagine it," he said, his voice firm now. He closed the remaining distance between us. He didn't touch me. Not yet. He just stood there, letting me see him, really see him. The strong, silent man who was just as afraid as I was. Last night, that was the first thing that's felt real to me in a long time. It scared the hell out of me too. I breathed. A real smile finally reached his eyes. It transformed his entire face, chasing away the shadows. "Good," he said. "Then we're even." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, old-fashioned brass key, worn smooth with time. He held it out to me on the palm of his calloused hand. "The past will be clear in a day or two," he said, his gaze steady and serious. "You can leave then. Go back to your life." He paused, and his throat worked. "Or you could stay. For a while. See what happens when the storm is over." It wasn't a promise of forever. It wasn't a flowery declaration of love. It was a key. A simple, tangible object. An invitation. An offer of a place to belong. It was more real and more meaningful than any poem. It was a gesture in his own language. The language of practical things, of shelter, of a door that you could choose to open. I looked from the key, glinting in the warm lamplight, to his face, to his hopeful, terrified eyes. My own fear was still there, a familiar ghost at my shoulder. But for the first time, it wasn't the loudest voice in the room. The quiet, steady presence of this man, the solid weight of the key he was offering, was louder. My hand was shaking as I reached out and took the key from his palm. Our fingers brushed, and this time I didn't pull away. I closed my hand around the cool metal, the teeth of it pressing into my skin. "I think," I said, my voice finally steady, "I'd like to see what happens." The days that followed were quiet, but it was a new kind of quiet, a shared quiet. We moved around the small cabin, learning the rhythms of each other's presence. The scrape of his chair as he cleaned his tools. The soft rustle of my pages as I tried to work on my notes. The comfortable silence was a language in itself, a testament to the understanding we had reached. The morning after he gave me the key, I woke up not alone, but with the solid weight of his arms slung over my waist, his steady breathing a warm presence at my back. I lay still for a long time, not in a spiral of anxiety, but in a state of quiet wonder. The morning light streamed in, and it didn't feel harsh or mocking. It felt like a promise. He stirred, his grip tightening for a moment before he slowly woke. He didn't pull away. He just blinked, his eyes focusing on me, and a slow, sleepy smile spread across his face. "Morning," he murmured, his voice thick with sleep. "Morning," I replied, and the simple word felt like the most profound declaration I had ever made. We made coffee together. measuring the grounds with my usual precision. He, working the old percolator with a familiar ease. We didn't talk much, but we didn't need to. The simple, domestic act of sharing the first moments of a day was an intimacy deeper than any words. We sat at the small table, sipping from thick ceramic mugs, watching the sun melt the last of the storm's fury from the high peaks. The pass cleared. The road was open. My meticulously planned itinerary said I was due back in the city. My grant was ending, my apartment was waiting, my old life was calling to me. For a single, panicked afternoon, the ghost of my fear returned. The thought of leaving this quiet, snow-covered world, of leaving him, was a physical ache. But the thought of staying was just as terrifying. Staying meant dismantling the life I had so carefully built. It meant choosing the unknown. That evening, I found him on the porch of the main lodge, looking out at the vast, star-dusted sky. I stood beside him, the silence stretching between us, comfortable and deep. "The road's open," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I know," he replied. He didn't look at me. He just kept his gaze on the constellations. "Are you packed?" "No," I said. "I can't seem to figure out how to start." He finally turned to me, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "What if you didn't? What if I didn't pack?" I asked, my heart starting to beat a little faster. "What if you just stayed?" he said. "I know this isn't your world. The books, the university. But maybe we could build a new one." Together, I looked from his earnest, hopeful face to the wilderness that spread out before us. It was no longer an indifferent, alien landscape. It was his home, and maybe, just maybe it could be mine too. It was vast and unpredictable and a little bit frightening. But it was also beautiful and real and alive. It was just like him. My life had been a collection of pressed flowers, perfectly preserved but brittle, trapped behind glass. Cole was a disruption. He was the storm that had shattered the glass and the sun that had come out after. He was the plot twist I never saw coming, the one that made the entire story make sense. He didn't just show me scenery. He showed me myself. He showed me that true resilience isn't about building thicker walls. It's about having the courage to grow, even in the harshest of climates. I reached into my pocket, and my fingers closed around the small, solid weight of the brass key. It felt warm in my hand. It felt like a promise. It felt like home. I looked back at him, at this man who was both my shelter and my greatest adventure, and for the first time in my entire life, I wasn't afraid of the chaos. I was ready to step outside.